Our mic is working. That's a miracle. So in the church where I trained on Fifth Avenue, I had to sing that gospel. So this is nothing to read it. It's okay. I prefer. Yes, thank you. Well, the first thing we need to say, without a shadow of a doubt, is that this reading is not about a woman and her 5 husbands. We've had interpreters misunderstand this for years, but they originally did understand the real meaning. It just kind of dropped out of sight, the way women kind of dropped out of sight in service in the church. But it was not a woman, but a man commentator who was able to zero in on what the significance of the 5 husbands really is, and what's going on here in this very deep theological discussion between this woman at the well and Jesus. You can tell as you hear the whole story that there's lots of imagery going on, but it's not easy to tell what they're talking about, except when Jesus says, "Drink of this water and you will live forever." That part I think we get, right? So let's go back and look at who these Samaritan people were in the first place. Well, the people of Jerusalem were conquered and taken to Babylon. But not all of them went. In fact, what we now know as Israel, there were a lot of people who stayed. Archaeological evidence says that most of them stayed. It was just the aristocrats and the priests and the people who did the temple worship in Jerusalem. They were the majority of the people who got sent to Babylon in captivity over several different times. Anyway, the people who stayed back, especially the Samaritans in their little area, kept the Judaism which they understood. And when the Jews came back from Babylon, it was a different Judaism. They didn't yearn for Jerusalem the way the people who had left yearned for Jerusalem. The people in Samaria worshipped on the mountain, and she makes reference to our people worshiping on this mountain. That's the mountain of Gerizim, and that's where Moses worshipped. They were expecting a Messiah, just like the Jews in Jerusalem were expecting a Messiah. But their Messiah was going to be like a prophet. He was going to be like Moses. And we know now from our transfiguration story and from other references to Moses that that was important enough to make it into all of the Gospels. That on the Mount of Transfiguration there was Moses, right? And there was Elijah. The Jews who came back had a very strong, orthodox view of what Judaism was. When they saw that the Samaritans had watered down the faith by incorporating 5 different tribes, idols, and some of their beliefs, they didn't consider them Orthodox Jews anymore. Hence this animosity between the Samaritans and the Jews. The Jews who called themselves Jews, they were Jews, just a different kind of Jew. They believed that their incorporation of these 5 tribes was just life. That's just how it is. But they didn't understand what these icons symbolized. They didn't see the depth of their betrayal. Now, in biblical speak, we use marriage words and marriage imagery to talk about our relationship with God. We have infidelity when we go to other gods, right? We have all sorts of other words, abomination, and you have not behaved well. But they use this imagery of the marriage to talk about our marriage to God, and that these people in Samaria had betrayed their marriage to God. And in fact, they weren't even really married to God anymore, which is why Jesus says, "You really have no husband." And why she understands that he has just told her the history of her people. She knows those 5 tribes that they assimilated and took their icons and their statues with them. And she knows that he is saying, what I have surpasses that. And he even says, it doesn't matter whether you worship in Jerusalem at the temple or whether you worship here on Mount Gerizim and climb up to the top of the mountain. What I have to offer you is new, and it surpasses any of that worship. And she believes him. Now, some of the interesting things that happen here are meant to reflect on the reading we heard last week. Remember Nicodemus, who came in the middle of the night to talk to Jesus and also asked these theological questions? But he didn't get it, right? And he snuck back in the middle of the night and was still confused. She, however, is at the well in the middle of the day. She is not ashamed to be seen with him, and we see from the text that he's not at all to be ashamed with her. And his disciples don't say, "What are you doing there with a Samaritan?" do they? They don't say that. They say, "What are you doing there with a woman?" That is part of their orthodox view, that he should not be with an unaccompanied woman and conversing. So they were troubled by this, but we know the disciples come almost last to understanding who Jesus really is. She, on the other hand, sees completely who he is, and she wants to drink of this water forever. She does in her actions what Mary Magdalene does when she is confronted with the risen Christ after the crucifixion. She is the first to go back as a representative of seeing the risen Christ. She goes back and talks to the apostles, this is Mary Magdalene, the same way that the woman at the well goes back to her people and tells them who she has seen. And the word he uses for who he is, did you catch that? He said, "I am he, the one who speaks to you." I am he is Yahweh. I am the name that cannot be pronounced. The people in Samaria worshipped Yahweh, and they were called Yahwehists instead of Jews, because that was their brand of Judaism. He used their word for God, in other words, to be inclusive and to invite her in. And that was part of what she was just overwhelmed with. Her recognition sent her as an apostle to her village, and many of them followed her. This text also says that she invited Jesus to come and stay with them for a while. And the words we remember here are, "Abide with me. Be nested with me. I will make my home with you." So they abide with Jesus, and more of them come to understanding who he truly is through his abiding with them and teaching them himself. All these things point to this new kingdom that Jesus is ushering in, surpassing any of our expectations, any of our old ideas about who we worship, what our God is, what our expectations of heaven might be. Even though we are Christians and we say we follow Christ, we all do so in a very haphazard and very human way. We come together to admit that we haven't a clue what we're doing some of the time. And we come and ask Jesus to be the water that we will drink. That when we drink this water, it will come gushing up out of us to reveal the kingdom of God to others through us. That is what grace allows us to do. But it's grace and not ourselves. We can't practice a discipline that will teach us all that Jesus gives us. So we say, thank God, we can't be perfect. We come here and as a community seek this Christ who surpasses all of our expectations, all of our hopes, and all of our orthodoxy, even Episcopalian orthodoxy. He surpasses it all. So we follow him wherever the water is. One of the reasons we have water exposed during our services now is so that we never forget what that water symbolizes. We drink from it. We wade through it to the promised land, and we are baptized anew in it every time we come here. Amen.